Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first ever live show of the Take Your Shot podcast in Los Angeles, California. Of course, as always, I am your wonderful host, Joshua Gitman, and this is absolutely incredible that we are live for the first time. I am very excited to advance the Take Your Shot podcast, and this is just an awesome opportunity, especially to do it on the road in Los Angeles where the Miami Heat are playing. But we've got a lot to get into today. We actually had a trade this week in the NBA. A trade in December is very unusual for the NBA, but we had it. And also today we have previewing the Los Angeles Lakers against my favorite team, the Miami Heat, which is why I am here currently in Los Angeles. So without further ado, let's get right into it. First off, the New York Knicks have acquired OG Anunoby in a trade with the Toronto Raptors in exchange for RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickley. The full trade details include the New York Knicks get OG Anunoby, Precious Achiuwa, and Malachi Flynn from the Raptors, and the Toronto Raptors get from the Knicks RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, and a 2024 second round pick via the Pistons, which basically means it's a first round pick because it's going to be the 31st pick in the NBA draft. But let's first talk about the New York Knicks perspective. Then we'll go into the Toronto Raptors perspective. Then we'll go into the winners and losers of the trade. So the Knicks go big. The Knicks go big, and they go big with defense. OG Anunoby, of course, if you've watched NBA basketball, he is a very incredible NBA defender, and he helps this already elite Knicks defensive team get even better on the defensive side. And it's a Tom Thibodeau player, the head coach of the New York Knicks, obviously a defensive player. Anunoby is on an expiring deal, so it was a little bit of a risk for the New York Knicks to get OG Anunoby. The New York Knicks and him are currently, according to sources, negotiating on a contract extension. He's looking for $40 million a year, but he may discount. Yeah, I don't think he's getting $40 million. But obviously the New York Knicks here, they gave up RJ Barrett along with Emmanuel Quickley, two players who combined average 33 points per game. I know OG Anunoby, he's averaging 15 points per game this season, but that's still 18 points per game left up on the board. So where is the scoring going to be made up? Is this like a sign for the Knicks of more trades to come? I mean, it has to be. You can't, Emmanuel Quickley and RJ Barrett are two core pieces of this team, and they are two core pieces that very, very much contribute in a major role, in a major aspect and role in this New York Knicks offense. So there has to be another move. I don't know what it's going to be. Could it be for a potential Zach LaVine, potential Donovan Mitchell, even though I heard reports that Donovan Mitchell is not on the table for the Knicks? I just don't really like it. My original thoughts, I just don't really like it for the Knicks because there's a lot of scoring to be made up, and it's going to have to be made up on the bench. I mean, you already got Mitchell Robinson. He's out for the season, so that's a brutal blow. They got Malachi Miles McBride off the bench now. He's now starting to play minutes for the Knicks. I watched the game against the Minnesota Timberwolves. They did win. OG Anunoby did have 17 points, but now you're gonna have other key bench guys for the Knicks who haven't really played and who haven't really had any experience, like Miles McBride, to step up. But I mean, you can clearly see there's something else here for the Knicks, because this trade didn't really make sense to me, giving up a lot of offense on a defensive powered team who lacks significantly in offense. And the one thing I did like about the trade for the Knicks is they still have all their picks. They didn't give up a first round pick in this trade. They gave up the second round pick via Detroit, which is basically a first round pick. But other than that, they really didn't give up any first round picks. They still have Mitchell Robinson to trade. They still have Miles McBride, even though he's now getting rotational minutes. And they still have Evan Fournier's expiring contract, who doesn't even play for the Knicks. So I do expect Evan Fournier to get traded probably by the trade deadline. So because why would the Knicks hold on to him and pay all that salary? So there has to be another move coming for New York, because if this is the move for New York, is this the move to make them a contender? No, it honestly to me makes them worse, because where's your scoring off the bench now? You have Josh Hart, Quentin Grimes, Miles McBride. Now you got Achiuwa off the bench, who that's the one part of the trade I actually like for the Knicks, getting Precious Achiuwa, because playing Taj Gibson coming off the bench now because Mitchell Robinson's injured. He's out for the season. So now the Knicks are starting Hartenstein. And Taj Gibson was coming off the bench, who's a little old, and he's just been with Tibbs for pretty much his whole career, dating back to the Chicago days. Now they get a young body in there in Precious Achiuwa. And to me, he is like a Tom Thibodeau player. So I do like the pickup of Precious Achiuwa. But there really isn't anything. There really isn't any bench for the Knicks. That's the problem. Like I just don't see how New York thought this was a win for them. It just didn't really make sense on the Knicks side. And so there has to be another move. Again, the bench, Josh Hart, Quentin Grimes, Precious Achiuwa, Miles McBride, Taj Gibson, and Evan Fournier is basically the core of the New York Knicks bench. With Emmanuel Quickly on the Knicks bench, it looked a lot better. There was scoring off the bench. You could come in and see Quickly get in 15 points on a good night, 20 to 30 points for Emmanuel Quickly. Remember, he finished second last year in Sixth Man of the Year voting behind Malcolm Brogdon. This Emmanuel Quickly is a very, very good player, and he would be starting on most NBA teams, most very, very good NBA teams that are not very good, like he is doing now with the Toronto Raptors. When they played Cleveland last night, he did start and he did score 15 points, but we'll get into the Raptors side of this a little bit later. So I didn't really understand why the Knicks gave up Emmanuel Quickly. I understand the RJ Barrett thing. It just wasn't really a fit. He wasn't really a Tom Thibodeau player. They really wanted to move on from a player like RJ Barrett, which makes absolute sense. But moving on RJ Barrett for OG Anunoby, whose contract is expiring, and you can only trust him for 15 points per game, and you gave up another young asset along with RJ Barrett to get OG Anunoby, to me, that's just, what are the Knicks doing? Now, if you're star hunting and a team asks for picks and a young player, where's your young player? Miles McBride isn't going to do it. So unless you're hoping for a superstar to come where you trade Julius Randle, that's the only way I can see the Knicks contending. I feel like they just gave up all their hopes of contending for the next 2 years, because who's your best asset other than Brunson and Randle? Who's your best young player? There's just nobody else. And even Emmanuel Quickly, another good young player where you can trade for a superstar. So it just, the trade absolutely made no sense for the Knicks. And honestly, I really didn't think they got any better. Quite frankly, you can make the argument that the New York Knicks actually got worse. I had them 5th currently in my East power rankings, behind obviously Milwaukee, Boston. I still have them behind Philly and Miami, because Miami beat the Knicks, and then Philadelphia has been very, very good this year with Tyrese Maxey advancing in his role with James Harden gone. So the Knicks are 5th right now, and I'm going to keep them at 5th. This really didn't make me jump out of my feet and say, holy crap, the Knicks are back, because the Knicks are not back. I mean, they did have an impressive win against Minnesota, but unless they keep on winning, unless they get on a high, unless they keep winning consistently, I just don't see how this is a win trade for the New York Knicks. And giving up Emmanuel Quickly too, that's brutal. That is absolutely brutal for New York, who's basically every guy on their bench is basically a defensive specialist. Hart, Grimes, Precious, McBride, they're all defensive guys. And the one offensive guy that the Knicks have, as I said, Evan Fournier, Thibodeau doesn't even like, and he doesn't even want to play. And he, to me, is the only guy left on the bench who is a reliable offensive asset. So I just didn't really understand this trade on the Knicks perspective. I get the understanding of having more urgency in this trade, but at the end of the day, you gave up 2 very, very important pieces on the offensive side of the ball, and probably is going to hurt you in the long term in the playoffs, because eventually, in today's NBA, offense basically is king to defense. We've all heard the phrase defense wins championships, but in today's NBA, offense is basically, if you score enough points, no matter what happens, because teams like just score back and forth. I was at the Heat Clippers game. There was like a period last night. There was like a period for like at least 6 to 7 minutes where it was just scoring back and forth. Maybe like one turnover that here and there, but like other than that, it was just scoring back and forth. So at the end of the day, now you need offense more than you need defense in today's NBA. So I really didn't understand this trade for the New York Knicks. But moving on to the Raptors' perspective of this trade, the question is for Toronto, are you going to reload or rebuild for Toronto? Because OG Anunoby is obviously part of that core of Toronto, who you just traded. They still got Pascal Siakam, which we will get into a little bit later. But you added two nice pieces in RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickly, excuse me. But it is a risk because RJ Barrett, he was a little iffy with the New York Knicks. His future's uncertain, giving him more of a lead number one guy role with this Toronto Raptors team, especially if Pascal Siakam gets traded. He could potentially be a star, but also at the same time, you don't know. He could potentially still be that 15-point per game guy who's just a above average player and not a star. So that's a little bit of a risk if you're Toronto. I really do like the Emmanuel Quickly pickup, finally giving him the opportunity to start on an NBA team. But back to RJ Barrett, it's a little bit of a risk if you're Toronto because he didn't even, for Thibodeau, he didn't even play crunch time. Like half the games under Thib, RJ Barrett's not even playing at the end of the games. He just looked very, very iffy. And I do understand that he needs a fresh start, but at the end of the day, if you're Toronto, you're taking a risk on him. I actually, as I said, I do like the Emmanuel Quickly part of this trade for Toronto more than I do like the RJ Barrett acquirement in this trade. Barrett, just to go over it, Barrett's averaged 18 points per game this season, and Emmanuel Quickly has averaged 15 points per game off the bench. The Toronto Raptors did win their first game against an injury-riddled Cleveland Cavaliers team without Evan Mobley and Darius Garland, but again, they still won. Barrett and Quickly started. They did their things. Barrett, I'm happy for RJ Barrett, though, in general, because he's finally back. He's finally home in Toronto. Obviously, he's from Canada, and he looked up to Toronto, so it's nice that he gets that opportunity to be back in Toronto. But again, it's just a risk for Toronto, and I don't really know if that was the move for Toronto, because why would, if you're Toronto, get RJ Barrett when teams like last year, the Memphis Grizzlies reportedly were offering you 3 first-round picks for OG Anunoby? If you're finally Masai Ujiri, if you're finally committed to this rebuild, why wouldn't you take Emmanuel Quickly in 3 firsts instead of RJ Barrett? Because I'm pretty sure the Knicks might have accepted that trade because the Knicks have a lot of first-round picks to deal. So I don't think it would have been as big of a deal with them as other NBA teams. So if you really want to rebuild, look at the Thunder now by acquiring all these picks. They're the second seed in the West after a few years. And the Jazz are doing the same thing as the Thunder, just acquiring all these picks after trading core pieces of their team. So I really didn't understand why the Raptors didn't get any first-round picks, because it doesn't really look like Masai Ujiri is fully committed to this rebuild. He looks like he just wants to reload. So I just don't really understand, because Toronto's a little bit under 500, but they're not too terrible to where they're fully rebuilding, because they still have Pascal Siakam, but they're obviously not good enough to where they can make the playoffs and win a first-round series in a 7-game series either. So they're really just stuck in this middle phase where you can't really do anything. Your first-round pick's not going to be too high, and you're not going to do anything in the playoffs. So you've got to pick a direction, and Toronto doesn't really have anybody to star hunt for. They don't really have the assets to star hunt. So the only thing to do is rebuild. And why reload and still be this middle of the pack team when you could have gotten 3 first-round picks instead of a risky player like an RJ Barrett for the New York Knicks? But again, I do have to give credit for the Emmanuel Quickly pickup. That was actually very, very nice by Toronto to get Emmanuel Quickly. I really do like Scotty Barnes pairing with Emmanuel Quickly. Two nice young players emerging, same year, same contract year, and just based off their style of play, it's really going to open up Scotty Barnes's game, especially because now when Darko was putting the starting lineups now, since he benched Dennis Schroeder, he's putting them off the bench now. Scotty Barnes was having most of that point guard role, so I feel like Emmanuel Quickly being there, it opens up the floor a lot more for Scotty Barnes when Dennis Schroeder doesn't play. So I do like that aspect of the trade for the Toronto Raptors. But again, it's just a major risk for Toronto. But so if I'm gonna be honest, if I had to grade this trade, I give it probably a C- for the New York Knicks and maybe like a B- or a C+ for the Toronto Raptors. I honestly absolutely hated this trade for both sides, because if you're looking at the franchise's direction, their needs and their necessities, both of these teams really didn't, to me, get what they needed out of this trade. The Knicks didn't really get an offensive star, like a 1A player. If you're going to give up two of your young scorers, why not get a 1A player? And to the Toronto Raptors, didn't get any first-round picks, especially if they're looking to move to a rebuild. They didn't get any first-round picks, which I don't understand, like, what these GMs are thinking. I just don't know what's going on in these GMs' heads, but that's what I think. And also, again, for Toronto, Barrett and Quickly sucked in the postseason this year, so I mean, it's just it's a risk. And if you're Masai Ujiri, why take the risk when you can just get first round picks? So I just didn't really like this trade for either of these franchises. We'll see how it pans out. But obviously, both the Knicks and Toronto Raptors got good starts after the trade. They both got wins that they were probably both underdogs too. The Knicks, as I said, beating the current number 1 seed in the West, the Minnesota Timberwolves, yesterday, and the Toronto Raptors beating the Cleveland Cavaliers at home yesterday as well. So it's off to a good start with the new players, but I just don't really like the trade for either of these teams. But next, we have to discuss if Toronto did trade OG Anunoby. Obviously, they still have one more core piece of that 2019 title team that consisted of Kawhi Leonard, Kyle Lowry, Fred VanVleet, OG Anunoby, Serge Ibaka, Marc Gasol. That one core piece who you could make the case was arguably their second best player during that championship run, and who has basically been their best player for a little bit now, Pascal Siakam. He's still on this Toronto Raptors team. So by trading OG Anunoby, does this mean Masai Ujiri, the Toronto Raptors president of basketball operations and GM, is going to trade Pascal Siakam? Obviously, it looks that way, but I don't know, because Masai Ujiri, again, he's reloading, not rebuilding with these players, so he may keep Pascal Siakam. But three teams that I do like, if Masai Ujiri does trade Pascal Siakam, which I believe he should, because as I said, the Raptors should be rebuilding with young assets instead of reloading, because they're really not going to go anywhere. So just fully rebuild if you're Toronto. I believe the three teams that should look into getting Pascal Siakam are the Indiana Pacers and Atlanta Hawks, two teams that have been a little bit linked to Pascal Siakam, especially during the offseason when there was a little bit of buzz that he may be traded during the offseason. But also another team that I do think could potentially enter the conversation of getting a player like Pascal Siakam is the Sacramento Kings, because obviously the Sacramento Kings in the Western Conference, they had a really good season last year. But again, they fell short in the first round. It was a nice season to light the beam, especially after the Kings finally made the playoffs after 16 years, pretty much. They didn't make the playoffs since I was born, so it was pretty special there in Sacramento. But now that you made it, You had your nice little year, your comeback year. It's time to get down to business if you're Sacramento. And if you want to contend in this heavily loaded Western Conference with teams like the reigning champions, the Denver Nuggets, a team like the Clippers that's loading up, Minnesota, a young team in Oklahoma City who's looked a lot better than Sacramento this season, you have to be willing to give up some of those young players, whether that's giving up Davion Mitchell, potentially even a Keegan Murray for a star player. And I feel like Pascal Siakam may be exactly that star player. Sacramento obviously could use Pascal Siakam again. He's another, just like OG Anunoby, a defensive heavy player. So if you're Toronto, if you're Sacramento and you know you have an offensive heavy team, they did have the number one offense in the NBA last year. I think they still have a top 6 or 7 offense, if I'm not mistaken, in the NBA this season. But if you're them, go get some defense. Go get a star who can play defense, a big man that can fit well next to Domantas Sabonis and Pascal Siakam. I think it works if you're Sacramento. I think this would put Sacramento in the conversation of contending in the Western Conference, along with Denver, the Clippers, and the Minnesota Timberwolves. That would definitely put Sacramento in the conversation. And honestly, this team, I really wouldn't be surprised if they pulled the trigger. They still have all of their first-round picks. They have young assets, as I said, in Davion Mitchell. Even if you have to give up Keegan Murray, I know how much Sacramento fans love Keegan Murray, but at the end of the day, this is Pascal Siakam. If you have to give up Keegan Murray, you have to give up Keegan Murray. You can offer 3 to 4 first-round pick swaps. I mean, Toronto would definitely accept that if they're willing to move on from Pascal Siakam. So I do believe that this is the right move for Sacramento. This is the right step. This is a step in the right direction for Sacramento, But so I really do think it would be a necessity to make this trade. And I think a trade would probably revolve around, as I said, a Davion Mitchell, who the Kings have basically given up on. Keegan Murray, probably, potentially, maybe Harrison Barnes to match salary, and probably 2 to 3 first-round picks and maybe a swap or two could potentially get the deal done for Sacramento. It would really help that team because that team is just god-awful on defense. So I think Pascal Siakam being there, who's somebody who can not only guard in the paint as a big guy, but can guard on the wing. He's a versatile defender. So I think it really will solve a lot of Sacramento's problems. So I think it'll be probably the trade that out of all of these teams, that would be the most impactful toward championship contention, most impactful for the championship contending team. But also, there's been also the Pacers and the Hawks have been linked as well. So we got to talk about what Pascal Siakam would be as a fit on their team. Let's start with the Atlanta Hawks, who have been mightily struggling this season. The Atlanta Hawks are 13-19 and currently sitting out of the play-in behind teams like the Chicago Bulls and the Brooklyn Nets. So this has just not been really the best of starts for Atlanta. And there has been a lot of rumors that DeJounte Murray could be traded because he hasn't really worked out with Trae Young. I thought when the Atlanta Hawks got Quinn Snyder, it would be a good idea. He's a good coach. I thought he did very well with the Utah team, and he maximized that squad. People said that Utah team was the worst number 1 seed of all time. That just gives credit to the coach for getting them to be that number 1 seed in Quinn Snyder. So I thought working with Trae, especially since he's had issues with coaches, and he's just a player that obviously has a lot to improve on, I thought that would be a good fit. But so far, it really hasn't been. They had a first-round exit to the Boston Celtics. Now they're sitting 6 games under 500, 30 to 35 games in the season. So if you're Atlanta, do you want to push? Do you want to potentially get Pascal Siakam to get your team back up and rolling and be a threat in the playoffs? Because remember, this team did make the conference finals in 2021. They did upset the Sixers. They did beat the Knicks in the first round, and they did push the Bucks, the eventual champions, to 6 games in 2021. So this team definitely has the potential to make a run in the playoffs. Like, I do believe that, especially with Quinn Snyder leading the way. They definitely do. So if you're Atlanta, you're struggling, do you want to push getting Pascal Siakam and keeping DeJounte Murray, or trading him to get Pascal Siakam could also be a potential option. Maybe a 3-team trade, sending DeJounte Murray somewhere else, getting assets, putting that to Toronto, and then giving Pascal Siakam. I could definitely see that if the Hawks do want to move on from DeJounte Murray. But they could also keep DeJounte Murray and really push to get back in the playoffs and get back in the realms of contention in the Eastern Conference. Try to get in that tier with Miami and Philadelphia. Obviously, nobody's going to get into the tier of Boston and Milwaukee unless you get a superstar. But they could definitely potentially get up to that tier with Miami and Philadelphia as teams who are the biggest threats to a Boston or Milwaukee if they made the Pascal Siakam trade. Again, I could see them trading DeJounte Murray, but if they don't trade DeJounte Murray in a 3-team package, I think the trade has to obviously consist around DeAndre Hunter. You got Jalen Johnson still. You have Sadiq Bey off the bench, Bogdan Bogdanovic. You could throw in one of those players along with DeAndre Hunter, potentially 2 to 3 first-round picks, pick swaps, and you could definitely get the deal done there if you're the Atlanta Hawks. Again, if you want to push to the playoffs. But for the Indiana Pacers, it's a little bit of a different scenario this regular season, as they are 18-14, and they are currently the 6th seed in the Eastern Conference. They have done a really good job this season. Remember, they made that run in the in-season tournament, upsetting Boston and Milwaukee along the way to make the in-season tournament championship before ultimately losing to the Los Angeles Lakers. So the Pacers have had a decent season, a little bit above what people had as their expectations. But remember, last year, the Pacers also were off to a good start, and then they fell off, and that was mainly because Tyrese Halliburton got injured. So this Pacers team is a decent NBA basketball team, this Indiana Pacers team. So if they do get Pascal Siakam and give up some of their young players like a Benedict Mathurin, I think they could enter that category with Philadelphia and Miami. They could be a potential threat in the playoffs. As you see their lethal offense, it's just like Sacramento. They do have a lethal offense, but at the same point, so giving up some of that offense for defensive-minded players, I think could work quite well for the Indiana Pacers. And like giving up Benedict Mathurin if you have to, giving up like Buddy Hield, an expiring contract, potentially an Andrew Nembhard or an Aaron Nesmith, 2 to 3 first-round picks, pick swaps, that could work out if you're Indiana. And I do think giving up those young assets would work out well for Indiana, because you don't need all that scoring. They're on a pace. If they're continuing this pace of scoring, at the end of the season, they could average the most points ever in NBA history. So, I mean, it might be okay to give up some of that offense for defensive firepower. And if they do make that trade, I would put them in the conversation as the biggest threats to Milwaukee and Boston with Miami and Philadelphia, So I think any of those 3 teams that they trade Pascal Siakam could make a major difference in their team. So I think for those 3, they should put that as a priority at the trade deadline. That should be their number one necessity, is to acquire Pascal Siakam, because he is a very good player. He's an all-star. He can be definitely a number 2 on a championship team, as we saw in 2019 behind Kawhi Leonard. He could definitely be that. So very impactful player. So I do believe that Toronto should look to trade him, and those 3 teams should definitely look to get Pascal Siakam. But moving on, let's just overall the trade. Let's talk about the winners and losers of this trade. To me, the winners of this trade include RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickley first off, because now they're getting a fresh start in Toronto. They really had iffy stints in New York, not really Emmanuel quickly. As I said, RJ Barrett really had the iffy stint in New York, but now he gets a fresh start going home to his home country in Toronto, playing for his favorite team growing up. It's just, it was time to move on for New York, but I didn't think it was the right trade for him to move on. But I did still think it was time to move on for RJ Barrett. So I do like that he is getting a fresh start. And Emmanuel quickly, after coming off the bench behind an all-star point guard in Jalen Brunson, finally gets that chance to start for the Toronto Raptors. So I think those two should be very, very happy at their current situation. Obviously not contending for the Eastern Conference like they would have playing for the New York Knicks, but at the same time, they did get fresh starts, and they are going to have bigger roles on this Toronto Raptors team, and obviously bigger roles mean more payday for players, and obviously it's all about the money these days in the NBA. And then another winner, my third winner of this trade, is Pascal Siakam. Pascal Siakam, as I just said, it looks like toward Toronto trading Pascal Siakam. I don't know if they're going to do it, but probably more likely than not, he will get traded, and Pascal Siakam finally getting out of Toronto, that's going to be a relief for him because, again, as I said, Toronto has just been a little bit of a disaster, a little bit of an average, a below average team, not too terrible, but not too good. So he's finally going to get a chance to start over with a new team that can potentially contend for an NBA title. So I think Pascal Siakam should be very happy with this trade, knowing that he will most likely potentially be moving on from Toronto. Those are my three winners of the trade. Losers of this trade, I think the Philadelphia 76ers are big losers of this trade because I do think OG Anunoby was somebody who I believe would have greatly helped Philadelphia and could potentially put them in the conversation with a Milwaukee and a Boston, because Philadelphia's had a very, very good season. Don't get me wrong. They're 22-10, third seed in the East by a little bit. But at the same point, you did give up James Harden, who is an above average player, and you do need to replace him with not necessarily a star, but somebody around the edges that can help your team contend, maybe one or two players around the edges. And I thought one of those players who could have potentially been one of those above average players that you could have replaced James Harden with is OG Anunoby. I think he fits Philadelphia's system quite well. Obviously, he played for Toronto. Nick Nurse is now the current head coach of Philadelphia, who coached Toronto last year. So he would have been familiar with Nick Nurse's system, so he would have fit him right away. There would have been no issues in the short term. So I thought that move for Philadelphia could have been very, very impactful. And now that's just one less player on the board for Philadelphia to acquire at the trade deadline. I do like Philadelphia potentially getting Bojan Bogdanovic from the Pistons and OG Anunoby. Those were the two guys I thought if Philadelphia could get those two guys at the deadline, I think they would have been in great shape for the NBA playoffs. But obviously, there goes OG Anunoby, so they're going to have to figure something else out for the trade deadline. My final loser of the trade, I do think, is the New York Knicks. As I discussed, giving up Emmanuel quickly to me was absolutely unnecessary when you could have given up first-round picks or you could have given up a Miles McBride. I just really didn't think that was necessary for the New York Knicks. And OG Anunoby can't be signed till free agency. He may very well re-sign with the Toronto Raptors. The New York Knicks. But you can't extend him. They do have their bird rights, which means New York gets to talk to him before he talks to anybody else. But he is a free agent, and if he could walk out, if a team like, let's say, Orlando, who has a lot of cap room, hey, come play for us for $40 million, he could easily walk out and say, I'm gone. So it's giving up Barrett and quickly, risking that. That could potentially put the Knicks next year for the 24-25 season in a very, very bad situation. So I do think it is a big, big risk for New York, and hopefully it pays off. And that's all I got for the trade. It was a surprising trade for December. I did really like the trade, like as an NBA fan, but for both teams, it didn't really work out. I don't really like it, and it doesn't really work out for them in the long term. But it is a trade, and we're excited that Toronto's finally pushing to this rebuild. As an NBA fan, as an NBA nerd, I'm very excited that Toronto's finally pushing toward a rebuild, because those fans absolutely deserve to not be in the middle of the pack and have some hope for the future. But we're going to move on. Quick take here. Goran Dragic, the Slovenian guard, has finally called it quits after 15 years in the NBA and will play a farewell game in his home country. He announced that this Sunday or Saturday that he was retiring. Dragic was most known for his 7 years with the Miami Heat, and he got his only All-Star appearance in 2018 with the Miami Heat after a couple of injuries. And in Miami, he averaged 16 points per game, 5.2 assists, and 3.2 rebounds. Pretty much those were his career numbers as well. Maybe 13 points per game, but pretty much same assists, same rebounds. Also, Dragic in his career played with the Phoenix Suns, Houston Rockets, Chicago Bulls, Brooklyn Nets, Toronto Raptors, and the Milwaukee Bucks. As a Miami Heat fan, I really do appreciate Goran Dragic. He is a very, very underrated player. And in the bubble with the Miami Heat, when they made that finals run, you could make the case, especially in that conference finals where they won in 6 games against Boston, that he was the best player in that conference finals. And he was a major, major piece to Miami for years, even in the 2016 when they pushed Toronto to that Game 7. Very, very big piece. And you could make the case that if Bam and Goran Dragic didn't get injured in the bubble, as Miami, without them, pushed it to 6 games, they could have potentially stolen the title from LeBron and the Lakers. So that's how much of an impact Dragic had for the Heat. And he's just a very, very good player. And happy retirement, Goran. You absolutely deserve it. From a Heat fan, that's just absolutely incredible career. And you will be missed, especially in Miami. But we got to move on. We've got a game tomorrow night. We've got 2 of the biggest markets in the NBA, the Los Angeles Lakers in Crypto.com hosting my favorite team, the Miami Heat. We'll start with the Lakers, go to the Heat, and then make a game pick. The Lakers, they've struggled a lot lately. The Lakers, ever since winning the in-season tournament, are 3-8. I actually think they're 3-9 now. They've lost 9 out of their last 12 games. Do the Lakers need help or can they just keep the ship afloat with this current roster? There's a serious question. Originally, I thought it was AD. AD is the piece. I've been on that. If you've watched my other shows, AD has easily been the piece that I believe if he was consistent and he was healthy, he could potentially have made the difference for the Lakers to win the NBA championship, be in contention in the Western Conference. But now that the Lakers are struggling mightily, I'm really considering saying that the Lakers do need a third star. Let me give you some stats here. They're 17th in scoring, not going to get it done. Average points allowed, they are 20th in 3-point field goal percentage. They're 20th in turnovers per game. They're 23rd in rebounds per game. They're 26th in field goal attempt, allowing field goal attempts. They allow the 4th most field goal attempts in the NBA, and they allow the 4th most 3-point attempts in the NBA. And also, they also allow the 7th most rebounds per game by an NBA team. So you can clearly see the problems here: rebounding, shooting, and defense. Obviously, this Lakers team isn't as strong other than LeBron and AD and Austin Reeves. That is basically their entire roster. And also, something that, let me give you another stat here for the Lakers. They've actually allowed the most 3-point makes in the NBA, so their perimeter defense is absolutely horrendous. I mean, when you have Austin Reeves, I love Austin Reeves. He's actually a favorite to me, one of my favorites who was not on the Heat. Think he's a very, very solid player, but his defense is not where it needs to be. D'Angelo Russell, his defense is not where it needs to be. Cam Reddish is not really the best defender. So their perimeter defense, just looking at the guards, not going to do it. So I do think the Lakers need a guard who can play perimeter defense, because as you can see, like, they allow a lot of field goal attempts, they allow a lot of field goal makes. And they all one other stat for you, they commit more fouls than any other team in the league. So their defense is absolutely atrocious, and it's just killing them in games, especially when you have two great defenders in LeBron and AD. So I really do think the Lakers need a third star. And that third star is, to me, DeMar DeRozan from the Chicago Bulls. Now, I say DeMar DeRozan because, you could say he's similar to LeBron. He is, to me, one of the most underrated perimeter defenders in the NBA. This man is basically carrying the Chicago Bulls on his back. And I mean, they haven't done half that bad this season. They're 15-19. They are 10th in the play-in behind DeMar DeRozan, especially since Zach LaVine has been out a lot of games this season. Considering that, the Chicago hasn't done as bad as people thought they would be this season. And DeMar DeRozan, for years, one of the best perimeter defenders in the game. He can also give you scoring. He can shoot from the I don't think they're going to fix it. I don't think he's going to fix the Lakers' three-point problems, but the defense, especially the perimeter defense, limiting the turnovers, because he can also be another potential point guard behind a LeBron James, especially if you do trade for DeMar DeRozan. You include D'Angelo Russell in that trade. DeMar DeRozan could be a potential point guard, someone who can bring the ball up as well. And if the Lakers are focusing on LeBron and AD, I think DeRozan could especially get with the third best defender on a team guarding him. DeRozan could potentially get a lot of his mid-range jumpers, and he is just lethal from the mid-range and lethal from the three-point line as well. So I think that piece for the Los Angeles Lakers would make a significant impact. Also, one thing that I do believe the Lakers do need to fix is Austin Reeves. I mean, he's only playing 29 minutes per game. I don't understand why Darvin Ham doesn't have enough trust in Austin Reeves as a player, because as I believe he's their third best scorer, their third best offensive player. Not as great on defense, but Austin Reeves really needs to be playing more. I just don't understand why. And I think the long-term move for the Los Angeles Lakers is that Austin Reeves should be starting and not coming off the bench. I believe he should be starting over Cam Reddish or Taurean Prince. Probably Cam Reddish, because I don't think he's as good of a perimeter defender as people think he is. So I think that should be the long-term move, because if you have a starting lineup of, let's say, LeBron, Austin Reeves, DeMar DeRozan, Jared Vanderbilt, and Anthony Davis, that is a great lineup if you're the Lakers. That is an absolutely amazing lineup if you're the Lakers. And that would put them back in the conversation with contenders in the West, because we know the Lakers can contend, because basically with this team, they made the conference finals last year. So if they get another piece, I believe they could potentially push to make an NBA Finals. Like, this team made the conference finals, even though we are saying they've struggled. They did make the conference finals, and they didn't play half that bad against Denver, even though they got swept. I still don't believe in close sweeps, but still, they didn't do that bad. They still got swept, but they really didn't do that bad as people sought out that they did. So if the Lakers just get one more piece, I do believe that the Lakers could be in that conversation. They're currently, if I look at the standings, they are currently 10th in the West at 17-17. But if they get on a win streak, which I believe they are capable of, they can get right back up there in the conversation, because the West is tightly contested. The Lakers are only 2.5 games from getting back to the 6th seed. And they were the 7th seed last year. So that's better than last year. And again, as we saw with the Heat and Lakers last year, does regular season seeding even matter these days? So I think if the Lakers just get one more piece, they could really be a serious contender in the West. I'm not too worried about them yet. I still think they can overcome their struggles. But if they're under 500 by the All-Star break, we should start to get a little bit worried. But for now, there's still plenty of time for the Lakers to fix their mistakes. So I think if we just give them time, if Darvin Ham makes the adjustments that he should, because if he doesn't make those adjustments, I don't believe he should be the head coach of the Lakers. But if he does make the right adjustments by starting Austin Reeves and incorporating a star player into that team, I believe the Lakers will just be fine. But moving on from the Los Angeles Lakers, we'll talk about my favorite team, the Miami Heat. This has been a question for years for the Miami Heat, ever since 2020, ever since they got Jimmy Butler. Do the Heat have enough? Let's just break down the roster. You've got Jimmy Butler. We know he's an absolute star. And if you don't think he's a top 5 player in the league come playoff time, I don't know what you're thinking, because scoring 56 in a playoff game is something that not a lot of NBA players have done. Not a lot of NBA players all time have done. And that, to me, I've watched that whole game. To me, beating that Milwaukee Bucks team with his performance was the second best playoff performance of all time, behind Michael Jordan's 61 in Boston Garden. Like, that playoff performance was absolutely incredible. We know he's capable of it. And let's be honest, that ankle injury against the New York Knicks absolutely hindered his ability to perform at a maximum ability, which is part of the reason why they lost to Denver. Part of the reason is they don't have star power. But you could make the case that they do if they're healthy, because remember, Tyler Hero, he's been playing solid this season, averaging 24 points per game. He was out the whole finals. He was out the whole playoffs. He broke his hand game 1. Some people make the argument that Tyler Hero hinders this team and doesn't really help this team, but I disagree, because I think at the end of the day, if you're complaining about the scoring, but at the same time you're complaining about the Miami Heat don't have that star power who can score the ball consistently, I mean, like, that makes no sense. So pick a side. So I think Tyler Hero helps this team, especially if they're fully healthy, with Butler and Bam Adebayo, who is one of the best centers in the league. He can guard 1 through 5. He's a versatile defender. And to me, he should be in the argument for Defensive Player of the Year every single season. Now, looking at the role players, still got Caleb Martin, who should have been the Eastern Conference Finals MVP. You've got Jaime Jaquez Jr., who I talked about last episode. If you watch that episode, I go into more detail of Jaime Jaquez Jr. He's one of the best rookies in the NBA class right now. He is, and to my opinion, he is the 3rd best rookie in this rookie class, behind Chet Holmgren and Wembanyama, but Chet Holmgren wasn't even drafted in this rookie class. So Jaime Jaquez is doing absolutely incredible. You got Kevin Love off the bench, who hasn't had a bad season. You still have Kyle Lowry. Two veteran players who can provide you a lot during postseason play. You've got Josh Richardson, who, in my opinion, has been very, very, very solid this season when he's healthy. You've got Duncan Robinson, who's had a reemergence this season after Max Strus signs with the Cavs. He gets more of a bigger role. He's been resurging. So I think those 9 players right there, they have enough. They are, like Bill Simmons said it on his podcast. He said he's not worried, because he's a Celtics fan. He said he's not worried about the Milwaukee Bucks as he is as the Miami Heat. The Miami Heat are a threat in the playoffs. They are a physical team, and Miami is not going to beat themselves. You are going to have to beat them fully in a 7-game series, and it will just wear you out. It will absolutely wear you out by playing the Miami Heat. And you saw that in 2020, 2022, and 2023. They are a major threat to everybody in the NBA playoffs. So, but people have discussed acquiring Donovan Mitchell, which obviously means you have to give up Tyler Hero. I wouldn't give up any more than that. Maybe Nikola Jovic and first-round picks, and maybe another one of those core 9 pieces other than Butler, Bam, and Jaquez. I would give up any other, along with Tyler Hero and Jovic, and 3 to 4 first-round picks, pick swaps. If you're Miami, I would definitely consider that. I would put that on the table. But for now, as they're currently constructed, I do think Miami does have enough to compete with Boston and Milwaukee. I saw it this regular season. I've seen it in the playoffs for years. I'm going to say it over and over and over again. Personally, I'm not even talking about a Heat fan. They have enough. If you look at them in the postseason, they absolutely have enough. And they prove to you, regular season doesn't matter. The regular season absolutely does not matter. If you're playing a 7-game series just like everybody else, whether you're the 8th seed or the 3 seed or the 6th seed, you're still playing a 7-game series. And if you have the team and you have enough, you can beat anybody. It's 7 games. To win 4 games. That's all you got to do. And this team absolutely has the ability to do that. So I don't think Miami needs to get anybody. If they do struggle, because they are on a 2-game losing streak right now, but if they do start struggling a little bit, you definitely do have to put it on the table to get a star player. They could, obviously, just like Philadelphia, work around the edges, could get, as I said, a Bojan Bogdanovic from the Detroit Pistons. You could get Malcolm Brogdon or Tyus Jones from the Wizards. You could definitely work around the edges if you're Miami, but at the end, you don't really need a star player if you're Miami. You're pretty much basically in the same situation as Philadelphia. You just need to work around the edges, but they do have enough to compete for an NBA title and to compete with Boston and Milwaukee in the East. I do firmly believe that. So, moving on, we're going to talk about the pick of this game, the Miami Heat playing the Los Angeles Lakers in the Crypto.com Center that I am currently sitting across from at 10 p.m. Eastern on ESPN, or in my time, 7 p.m. Western. In the first game that the Lakers and the Heat played, the Miami Heat got the job done at home. It was a close, competitive game for the Miami Heat and the Lakers. It was a fun game. LeBron coming back to Miami. It's always fun. Miami did win that game, though. As I said, they won it 108-107. The Lakers had a shot to win it. Cam Reddish missed the 3. LeBron finished with 28, but in this game, Jimmy Butler will not be playing. Caleb Martin is also doubtful to play. Josh Richardson for the Heat is questionable for the Miami Heat as well. So the Miami Heat have been a little bit injured. The Lakers have had a little bit of their injury issues, but they've had 2 nights off, so I think LeBron and AD should be healthy. The Lakers should be ready to go in this one. I am going to pick the Lakers because Jimmy Butler's out. I do think that the Miami Heat, if they want, it's just in a tough spot. You're already on a losing streak, and the Lakers have mightily struggled, and they desperately need a win. And if the Lakers cannot win this game, go under 500, I think it'll just be a huge kick in the you-know-what to their morale and just their chemistry and their team motive. This game, obviously 18-17 going to 17-18, it's like a direction changer. Are you above 500 team? Or are you an under 500 team? So I do think it's a direction changer for the Lakers, and I really do think the Lakers need this game more than the Heat do. The Heat, obviously, the injury problems, they're struggling. So it's more of a necessity for the Lakers to need this game, and I do think it's an even game, expected to be very competitive, just like the last game. But the Lakers are at home, and I do expect them to get the win. And if they don't, there should be a lot of concern coming from the Lakers side, especially losing to an injury-riddled Heat team at home. And that's all I got for you today. Thank you so much for watching the first ever live show of the Take Your Shot podcast in Los Angeles, California. I'm very, very blessed to do this podcast live for the first time. There will be more podcasts on camera, most likely not live. I am going to take Friday off since I did this podcast, so we will not have a Friday podcast this week. But there will be a Take Your Shot Top 5. I will make that and post that. No podcast this Friday, the 5th. I will be back January the 12th to start discussing All-Stars, and let's see if any other trades happen, more NBA news. It just happens week by week, so we'll see what I'm talking about there. But thank you so much for watching the show. And remember, please follow on Spotify, Take Your Shot, and on Instagram at take_your_shot_podcast_. Again, that's at take_your_shot_podcast_. And tell me how you would have taken your shots on my takes. That's all my shots today, folks. Thank you so much for watching the first ever live show, and I will see you next time.